All right, so
Oops,
welcome,
sorry.
welcome everyone. I'm Sonia Fisher, Vice Chair of the Clackamas County Commissioner. Thank you. Subbing in for Chair Bernard, who is in Salem, lobbying on behalf of all of the residents of Clackamas County. And before we get started, why don't we quickly go around and just introduce ourselves in case some of us don't know each other. So we'll start here.
Jennifer Chambers, Budget Manager.
Laurel Bettman, Deputy County Administrator.
Gary Schmidt, County Administrator.
Sonia Fisher, County Commissioner.
Ron Weigel, Budget Committee.
Russ Axelrod, Mayor West Lynn, and Citizen Advisory, what is it?
Budget Committee member.
Citizen member. Thank you.
Commissioner Martha Schrader, Clackamas County.
Christopher Bowker, Budget Committee.
Ken Humberston, County Commissioner.
William Gifford, Budget Committee.
Paul Savas, County Commissioner.
Roxanne Fisher, Budget Coordinator. Jen Jiang, Budget Coordinator.
Chris
Excellent.
Story, West, Assistant Director.
You don't get to introduce yourself because you get the whole floor in just a minute. But since you did that, then.
And last but not least, Doug Waugh, Finance Manager for West.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. And with that, I believe we need to elect a chair for our committee. So is there a motion from anyone out there?
I would like to nominate William Gifford.
Excellent. Is there a second?
I'll second the nomination.
Great. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. I think you are the chair. So with that, Mr. Gifford, you can take over the meeting. Would you actually like the gavel? Should I just throw it to you there?
Please don't give him the gavel. He's sitting next to me.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
So our first order of business is to elect a secretary. So open the nominations for secretary.
I would like to nominate Ron Weigel.
Is there a second?
Second.
No, it's not what it says. It says over here that Russ is supposed to second.
I'll second. I'm catching up. I'm just getting my paperwork under myself.
Been moved and seconded.
You asked.
It's the
So
last budget of the day.
we're not asking for additional nominations. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? We have a secretary. And let me see, so our next is our budget presentation. And I understand in lieu of Greg, Mr. Story is going to take care of this.
Indeed.
You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee members, staff, Mr. Administrator. We appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. Greg wishes he could have been here. He had a very sudden and unexpected illness strike him yesterday that actually led to an ER visit. So that's about what it takes for him not to show up for these sorts of things. So we're going to try and fill in for him as best we can, and he'll be back as soon as he can.
He's okay.
So in lieu of that, I'm happy to share with you the budget message for Water Environment Services for our proposed 1920 fiscal year. This is the second year where Wes is presenting a combined budget where we don't have any elements from the prior service districts of CCSD1 or Tri-City or SWIMAC. This is the whole enchilada, and we're happy to say that we are now getting our feet under us, and it's becoming a more smooth process, and we're able to present to you a cohesive strategy that has been vetted through our advisory committee that allows us to take those steps forward to providing a regional service. We will be sharing with you throughout this presentation an emphasis on our operations, our capital projects, both from the sewer and the surface water standpoints, and sharing with you our Performance Clackamas approach to performance to ensuring that our customers are receiving the best service possible with the rate dollars that are being entrusted to us. As part of that presentation, and I'm going to not read the entire budget message that's in the budget book because I'm sure you've read that already, but I did want to mention that there are a few challenges that we'll be talking about as we go through the presentation as well. The biggest one is aging infrastructure. As you will note from Wes's proposed budget, there is a significant investment in capital projects that we are proposing over the next 5 years, including the current fiscal year and next fiscal year. And those are sort of the leading indicators of where our industry is going as a whole, and Wes is not immune to that. And so a lot of our conversation today is going to be talking about how we're utilizing existing assets, refurbishment and expansion of new assets, and being able to meet the needs of our customers as we go forward. With that, let's just go ahead and turn to the presentation. I hope you all have that. And just to remind you of what we're trying to do, Wes is I hope we all know this, the wastewater, surface water provider for the region. And we want to make sure that we provide clean water. As Mr. Geist likes to point out, clean water in the form of sanitation is the #1 public health gain in the history of civilization. Without appropriate sanitation, you have massive diseases, you have the inability to sustain populations in the concentrations that we see in urban areas. So this is the essential service for the civilization that we have right now. And we are proud to provide that service for our community. Water Environment Services per Performance Clackamas is organized into 4 lines of business and then broken down further into 11 programs. Those programs reflect our attempt to characterize to our customers the types of work that we are providing and try to give transparency in how we're allocating those money. So you will see in the budget document how we've broken out our funds generally along those lines of business, then specifically within those programs. The budget that you see before you has some big numbers to it. And we wanted to highlight this just up front to make sure that you see what's going on, where you will see that our revenues that are coming in are increasing, but our expenditures are increasing much faster. It's not that we are somehow raising rates dramatically. What you're rather seeing is proceeds from loans. And we're doing an SRF loan, State Revolving Fund loan under the Clean Water Act. That's supporting the construction of the solids handling project at the Tri-City. That was a bid at $33.5 million. We are anticipating just under $14 million in loan revenue this coming year. So you're seeing a significant ramp up of expenditures. That is important. I want to make sure that we all see that. We're not increasing our revenues all that much, but we sure are ramping up our expenditures. And that is by design. And I'm sorry, I should emphasize, and the general fund component of that, you will note it's technically on there, but it doesn't show up because it's 0. We do not collect any property taxes. We do not collect any revenue from any other portion of the county. This is all rate related. Our total proposed budget is broken.
Excuse me, Mr. Story. This expenditure's growing faster than our revenues. This is a similar symptom that we're seeing at the county level as well.
Yes, although the cause of it, I think, is a bit different. The primary driver, as I understand it, although I'm loath to speak for Administrator Schmidt, is the labor cost drive is significantly driving the rates. For us, it's capital costs. And as you will note in this sort of percentage breakout, our operating budget is actually only 18% of the total requirements for our proposed budget. Of our 30 million approximately operating budget, about half of that is labor. We still spend quite a bit of money on chemicals, electricity, equipment. Ours is a tool and activity intensive business. We're not as labor intensive as many other portions of the county. But the shift you're seeing as far as the expenditures is almost exclusively on the capital outlay portion of the budget.
Thanks for that clarification.
We are looking at, and this is part of our long-term financial strategy, Doug, who has managed Wes to a AAA rating over the course of his career here at Wes. We saw this coming. We had our engineers talking about this for the last several years. So our financial planning has been to try and have moderate rate increases and build up reserves so that we can use those reserves when we hit this point of intense capital construction. Right now, our ending fund balance is significant. You will see that it's nearly 60% of our total resources, which is to say it's right around $100 million. We anticipate it being around $80 million by the end of the next fiscal year. So we are starting to spend down this ending fund balance, but that was part of an intentional design so that we would not have big rate jumps now and have 0 rate increases in the previous several years. So part of our financial planning is to do exactly what you're seeing right now, where our expenditures are increasing rapidly. Overall, when you look at the allocation of the budget and the type of effort that we're putting in, you will see a shift away from, you might say, administrative or business services towards capital and operations. We're very much intensifying our efforts in that area, in particular capital. Wes actually recently engaged the American Society of Civil Engineers to do a peer review of our department, to come in and take a look at how we're doing things and offer suggestions around what other peer industries, peer agencies have been doing in our industry. And they noted that our capital planning and management group was understaffed for the level of work that we're trying to undertake. And we've recognized that. Last year, you may recall, we asked for an additional FTE support to try and grow that group, and we have hired an engineer, but we're trying to hire more because our engineering group is in some ways a bottleneck for our ability to deliver the many capital projects that we're talking to you about today. And you will see in our proposed budget an actual FTE ask for an additional engineering position as well, because we are seeing that as one of our main challenges to success. You will also see an increase in operations as we are constructing additional facilities. We have to then staff them to make sure they continue to work well. So we have been shifting folks internally to try and optimize our distribution of labor, but we're also looking at an ask in this coming fiscal year for 2 additional FTE. Overall, when you look at the lines of business and where we are spending our money, operations is the bulk of it, and then you break it down between, I'm sorry, Mr.
Excuse me. Back on the FTEs, would you like to discuss a little bit about the distinction between hiring engineering staff and just contracting that out?
Absolutely. That was part of the recommendation, and frankly, from the ASCE peer review, what we're trying to do is optimize the size of our capital program, because this 5-year, approximately $50 million CIP that we're undertaking is not the last capital project we're going to do. We're looking at the level of work, and we do engage a fair amount of outside engineering in support of these projects, particularly around design and some support around construction management. Nevertheless, we try to have our own in-house engineers be the project managers, the ones that particularly are watching the dollars and in making sure the design integrates with everything on the ground, all the parts fit together. Right now, we have 4 engineers, and one of them is relatively junior, and then we have 3 senior engineers and an inspector. We have a process engineer vacancy that we're trying to recruit, where we have an engineer at the treatment plant who can then optimize our facilities, and our ask is for an additional engineer, and we actually have a vacancy that we're recruiting there as well. We recognize that Administrator Schmidt has identified the high likelihood, I would phrase it, of a hiring freeze, and that there will be an exception process as part of that conversation. So we anticipate having that conversation after July 1 if this budget is approved, because we are seeing that as a real challenge.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yes. And certainly, if anyone has any questions, please, I would love to stop talking at any point and listen to your voice. With respect to the lines of business, as you can see, operations is the bulk of it. Over half of our staff and half of our expenditures, including electricity, equipment, et cetera, is all in operations. Environmental services includes our surface water, industrial pretreatment programs, capital planning and management. Not only includes engineering and project delivery, but also asset management and a lot of our sort of technical software systems that we manage through there. And then business services includes finance and administration and the office of the director. The part that you probably are most interested in, around 85% of our total revenue comes from monthly rates. So what we are looking at now is, after conversations with our advisory committee, is a recommendation to shift our rate approach from a geographic emphasis to a service emphasis, so that a West customer will pay the same for a service irrespective of where they are located. That will create some odd bumps for the initial year as we adjust folks, and then going forward, no matter where you are, it should experience the same rate changes. But for this year, it means that rate zone 1, which is the former Tri-City Service District area, will actually experience a slightly lower than average rate increase, except for the retail portion of the district, which is in a fairly small unincorporated area just outside of Oregon City. It runs up Holly Lane, and it serves Ogden Middle School. There's a church there, and Country Village, which is a mobile home park in the unincorporated area that was annexed into the Tri-City Service District back in the 80s, and they have not annexed into the city of Oregon City, so we serve them as retail customers. And so they will be shifting to the same retail rates as everyone else.
Excuse me, would you like to clarify the distinction between wholesale services and retail services? I'm in the retail business, and it doesn't seem as though I'm selling, it doesn't seem to be the same analogy between
You're-
wholesale and retail.
You're absolutely right. We're not manufacturing something and then giving it to someone else. The distinction for wholesale and resale, the way you might frame it, is who runs the collection system. The treatment works provide service for everybody, and it's very much an economy of scale business, and as we work together, we all save money. The collection systems can be operated by WES, as it is in most of CCSD1, or it can be operated by our city partners. The city of West Linn, for example, has their own collection system, which is the smaller pipes that run from the homes down the streets to the main interceptors. Once it hits the larger interceptors, it becomes part of the wholesale system. And we have a system of pumps, I think 19 different pumps throughout our system, and large interceptors that then convey the wastewater to the treatment plants. So we use the distinction of between the interceptors and pump stations and the smaller pipes as the distinction between wholesale and retail.
This is a side note. The word retail comes from the French verb tailler, T-A-I-L-L-E-R, which is where we get the word tailor. And it means to retail means to cut something again. You would buy a large bolt of cloth and then cut it again and sell it in a smaller part. That's not the analogy. That's why sometimes I think it's a little confusing to say wholesale and retail because you're not cutting anything smaller. It's how it's being distributed.
In many ways, I think because we think of it in terms of the same way gravity flows, right? It starts small and then we combine it to big. But if you flip the way the system is going, you start to see it splitting out to get to, we're cutting the size of the pipes till you get to the house itself. So if I may offer a counter analogy, we sort of get there, but not really, because I didn't even know that was a thing until you just told me.
That's close enough.
We're going to get an argument about semantics or do the budget?
Commissioner Savas has first.
Can't resist. So another way of looking at it is like, look at waste collection. So your people who come out to your house, pick up your garbage, they are the retail collection service. But the people who operate the landfill are completely separated from those who do the collection. And so our wastewater treatment facility is our
Like the landfill.
wholesale aspect of it. And everything that gets it from the home to there
It's the
almost
retail.
is the retail side of it,
Yes.
with the exception of some of the conveyance aspects.
Yeah. And the key takeaway from this is irrespective of whether you get retail service in rate zone 1 or rate zone 2, you will be paying the same basic rate. There is some degree of distinction because rate zone 2 includes what we're calling the legacy debt service component to their rate, where part of the agreement with the formation of WES is that rate zone 1 and rate zone 3 would not be responsible for the cost of the debt incurred by CCSD1 prior to the consolidation of the operations of the districts. So you will see the total monthly rate that's proposed is higher in rate zone 2.
Thank you.
Quick question? Just
Please.
a point of clarification. Well, I heard you say two things. One is that the retail rate on this applies only to a small zone in Oregon City, but then you just described a retail portion in West Linn. Does it not apply to that?
The
That's
rate.
what I'm just wanting to confirm.
Right.
'Cause
So what I'm suggesting is to the extent there's something in rate zone 1, which is just that unincorporated area outside of Oregon City, the rate total you will see is $36.40 for them in the actual dollars they'll pay. In rate zone 2, it's $50.55 is our proposal. The difference that you're seeing there is the legacy debt service component to ensure that the folks in rate zone 2 are paying it. The city of West Linn charges your own separate retail rate on top of the wholesale rate that we charge, similar Oregon City and Gladstone. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
And then you will see concomitant inflationary, slightly more than inflationary adjustment in the surface water area as well. System development charges. We've also had an extensive discussion with our advisory committee around system development charges. The revised capital improvement plan that was adopted by the board back in February means you run a calculation by statute to say how much one could charge for a system development charge. The CIP suggested a total maximum SDC charge of $13,019 was eligible to be charged. There was a policy discussion at the advisory committee level about the appropriateness of that charge, looking at the ranges of what people are paying now and what we could look at going forward. The recommendation from the West Advisory Committee to this committee was to look at harmonizing the SDC rates across our customers for sewer, with a subsequent discussion to take place about potential phase-in up to the maximum allowed. But for this fiscal year, it would be, in essence, just a harmonization at the current rate that's being charged in Rate Zone 2, adjusted for inflation. So you will see the retail sanitary sewer SDC, that is a 3% adjustment, and that becomes the baseline for everyone else to harmonize to. That means, in essence, that we are charging only a wholesale SDC at this point. There's no retail component to it because we are not charging the full amount that's allowed by statute. That is the proposal. It is certainly at the discretion of this group to make a recommendation and ultimately the board to decide.
Did you want to discuss during this time, or you want to get through the whole thing and come back to,
Well,
maybe let them get through everything and come back? Or
you know what, why don't we discuss it now? And the reason being is that we're going to be having a public hearing afterwards in case there's somebody else that wants to make some other comments. So I'd rather get it in context.
Oh.
Than drag it up later,
Okay.
if that's the will of the
Oh,
group.
so we haven't actually opened the public hearing?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever you think's appropriate.
I think it's appropriate to talk about it now.
Okay. Well, we did have a discussion at the last committee meeting, and since then we received a letter from Milwaukee with a request outlining their concerns for the increase that was discussed. And some of us talked and shared their opinions on around the issue of the STCs and their impacts. And one of the things I had expressed was I didn't see per se the STCs as the result as driving the problem for housing cost. Nevertheless, I think it's important to listen to our partners and to recognize that wherever we can influence and reduce the cost of affordable housing, I think it behooves us to do that and to be sensitive to that change. So I want to be sensitive to Milwaukee's request, and I'd like to honor their request that the board consider, the committee consider the considerations that Milwaukee outlined for their recommendation moving forward on the STCs.
And I think it's important, to make sure that everyone has the same context. I'll restate what I understood from the City of Milwaukee's comment letter that I believe was delivered to the board in this morning to the entirety of the Budget Committee. They had as a takeaway from the West Advisory Committee recommendation that the SDC was going to increase to $13,019. And they expressed grave concern that that was going to impact the affordability of housing in their city. What I had understood the West Advisory Committee's recommendation is they were open to and wanting to have a discussion around the SDC eventually increasing to $13,019. But for this coming fiscal year, the proposal for this budget committee to consider is to look at just this harmonization to the 7850 number, which is an inflationary adjustment for the most part for the majority of the customers that would be paying SDCs in Rate Zone 2, of which they are a part. The proposal that staff heard would be a subsequent discussion with the West Advisory Committee to talk about the impacts of the policy of the SDCs, and we actually want to try and tie that with our rule revamp and the definition of what an equivalent dwelling unit is. We offer discounts. Basically, we charge less for apartments. You could do similar for size of houses, equivalent ADUs. I mean, there's lots of policy options that it would be as part of the mix of the knobs and levers you could turn to try and tailor the impact to make housing more affordable. But for this particular budget year, harmonization, it was the recommendation from the advisory committee.
Is there anyone on the Budget Committee that had a different perception of that conversation? You weren't on that committee yet. I just wanted to get that clear.
Oh, that committee. Oh, okay.
Okay.
You said budget committee, so.
Yes, the Budget Committee subsection of the Advisory Committee. Now, Commissioner Sevis.
Thank you. So about 20 some odd years ago was when I first started sticking my toe in the water on this one. Granted, wasn't very clean.
The toe or the water?
Water.
Both.
Now both, yeah. So we've been, the board of county commissioners for the last couple cycles here, going back a few years ago, was aiming towards parity and getting us all on a level playing field to some degree, knowing we had huge capital expenditures. And I did read the letter. I just got wind of it, actually, this whole matter late last week. So I did speak to Greg on Friday at length. And for those that are aware, and this goes back a couple commissions ago, I've been foreseeing this coming. I've been suggesting for a long time that we look at tiered rates. And one way, and Chris kind of said it, but he didn't say it that with this kind of definition, that one way is how you define an EDU. You can do it that way, or you can actually tier them. It's all the same. The effect's the same. So if you say, for example, like an apartment is what, we're 0.75 or 0.7? That's of an EDU. So they pay a lower rate. However, I think that if you look at a lot of the housing crisis and you're sensitive to what I think a lot of us are, Milwaukee is, of course, we need to have that conversation, and we should have had it a long time ago. But I'm okay with leveling the playing field and making sure that every new EDU pays the actual cost of what, as best as possible, to what we're spending $50-something million, and a new EDU is a new EDU, and that wastewater element of that is something that everyone should pay the equal amount. However, what I do agree on is that we need to get back to how we tier that, so that 5-bedroom homes with 3 or 4 bathrooms are paying a different rate than those modest homes that have 1 or 2 bathrooms or fixtures, however you do. So there's a way of doing that. You can do that by a tiered rate. You can do it by redefining what an EDU is. But I think that apartment buildings and smaller homes are 2 different things. So it's a conversation to have. But as long as I'm not on the committee, the advisory committee, but as long as the advisory committee steps up the discussion on that, I'm supportive. If we're just going to kick this can down the road on this, then I'm more sensitive to what Milwaukee's saying. But I think that's one way of bridging that gap and broaching that, so that we can get some relief for more modest housing and more affordability.
Thank you. I tend to agree with Commissioner Savis on the tiered rate concept going forward at some point, which is obviously a discussion that your committee would have to have. But I would definitely say that when you construct a house or an apartment building or whatever it is, you need to capture those costs up front with SDCs, because at some point in time, the piper has to be paid.
Oh,
And
I see what you did there, the piper. Yeah, good.
yeah, and what you don't want to do is have to have it way more expensive because of a deteriorated system, as opposed to one that you've maintained and improved along the way. So, you know, I understand the concern about affordable housing, but I don't care what you add, what you do when you're building a house, there's always going to be added costs, whether it's from the infrastructure or the fact that the price of land went up or the price of labor went up or whatever. So when it comes to something you actually have control over, such as SDCs and that infrastructure, capture the cost at the beginning, because it's going to be cheaper then than it will be in the future.
Just a point of clarification, I want to make very clear that I do believe that growth should pay for itself, so I'm very firm about that. I'm in total agreement with you.
Okay.
I'm just looking for a way to sort of soften the impact initially for Milwaukee as we, move forward. And this approach, which is outlined, I believe, to adopt this inflationary rate in this first year, and for the committee to more aggressively in this next year evaluate a tiered sort of option or whatever approach that is, to bring about some form of equity that covers costs, I'm all for.
Chris?
I thought I'd just throw in, and corroborate what you were saying, Chris, his interpretation of that. I think everyone at the budget, within the budget committee and at the advisory committee is aware that growth should pay for itself. However, there were some concerns voiced about the sort of drastic increase, especially say for like rate zone 1. So I think we're just trying to hit this compromise, a sweet spot, so to speak. Whereas this coming budget year, we'll go, I think the recommendation is 7850, and then we'll meet, I believe, in September to have a more thoughtful discussion of what happens after that. Does it increase? How do we phase that, and what the timeline is? So none of that's been really articulated to a greater degree, but I think everyone is in the mindset that we will get there because, I mean, this is something that does need to eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, begin to start paying for itself.
Ron?
Well, that took what I was going to say. Basically, just that to confirm for everybody that the discussion that was described earlier did in fact take place, and that all the members of the Budget Committee were in fact looking at some type of reasonable fair share to be able to have an equitable SDC.
And mine's really quick. I just want to for anyone watching this, we're talking about rate, we're talking about the SDC, System Development Charge. It's not a monthly rate. And furthermore, that is something that the city of Milwaukee doesn't pay. It's whoever the purchaser of the property or the apartment or whoever's building it is, and it passes through the city of Milwaukee, collected by the city, but the city doesn't pay that. So we're not compromising the city's finances by making that System Development Charge bring that up to parity with others.
Absolutely. And to affirm the great conversation I just heard, the advisory committee we've scheduled in September, you might say a dual conversation. The West Advisory Committee asked us to bring back some modeling because ultimately we're talking about system development charges as related to our capital improvement plan because one way or another we have to build the infrastructure. If we don't collect the revenue through system development charges, we collect it through rates because we don't levy property taxes. So it's a trade-off between who pays, the upfront cost of the housing or the inhabitant of the housing over time through rates. And we don't operate with a profit motive, so we charge just what we need to accomplish the purposes in front of us. So that trade-off and phasing, we are modeling the impact on the rates for taking various approaches and then asking for a policy discussion from our advisory committee around what that would mean. We're also trying to map that to a year-long process that Wes has been undertaking with Ron Wieringa as the lead on a rewrite and modernization of Wes's rules, which will include a modernization and relook of the EDU allocations for various activities, including apartments, ADUs, commercial activities, making sure that frankly, we've been overcharging some types of businesses and undercharging others, and we're trying to make sure that we're capturing the true impact of folks on the system as we go through that. And they become another tool in the, might say, policy tool belt in making the best choices we can make around making sure that we can both have affordable housing and making sure that the right people are paying for their impacts on the system.
Well, apologies for sidetracking the presentation, but I want to thank Mayor Axelrod for bringing up the subject, especially vis-a-vis the letter from Milwaukee. I think that we deserve that robust discussion. I am confident, as I think our other advisory committee members are, that this reevaluation of SDCs is going to be a priority for that committee in the upcoming year and certainly the biennium.
Absolutely.
So with that, if you'd like to return to business.
Yes, sir. So having said that, we wanted to make sure that now that we've talked about rates and system development charges as far as revenues coming in, how are we using this money and are we doing a good job of being stewards of ratepayer dollars? So we look at this through the framework of performance clackamas, and we wanted to share with you a couple results that we consider to be indicative of the overall work that we're doing. The first in particular is a new result that we're relatively proud of because we finally found a way to characterize it in the performance clackamas framework, which is to say we used to have one that said we won't violate our permit, which is sort of the baseline, don't pollute the river, right? Yeah. And we're like, that's not really what people, that's not the expectation we have for ourselves. So why are we communicating that?
Right?
Yeah, right. So what we've identified is basically the safety margin of being within 15% of violating the permit. And we're trying to measure for our 6 key, you might say, pollutant parameters within the permit, anytime we cross even into that safety zone, what's going on? How are we managing that? We don't even want there to be the opportunity for a permit violation. We have, frankly, one facility in Boring which is straining those resources, and it actually had something of a budget impact in the current fiscal year where the system just started breaking down. It wasn't operating effectively, and it's fairly old and unsophisticated. We ended up actually hauling the majority of the treated wastewater by truck to manholes and then dumping it in our system for either Kellogg or Tri-City to treat. Because it wasn't able to meet its discharge permits by its own. So rather than violate our permit, we dedicated our fleet, our liquid tankers that we typically use at Kellogg to haul biosolids, to haul the wastewater to our other treatment plants, which is a suboptimal solution. So we're working on that. We have our engineers, again, the bottleneck of the engineering program, they're like, we really need to fix that. So that's something we're working on. But even with that excitement, we are doing quite well, which is why we've raised our target to 100%, not even getting into the safety zone. The second is around biosolids. As you may recall, the solids handling project, that's certainly a major investment. We are trying to enhance our ability to serve there. We actually had a little bit lower result here, and this is part of our commitment to you, which is we'll show warts and all, where we had an accident back in January where we have a spreader that spreads the materials on farm fields in Sherman County across the east. The spreader was destroyed when it rolled down a hill. Fortunately, our employee was not significantly hurt. We're pleased with that result. But that meant we actually had to haul to a landfill rather than, because we didn't have the equipment to spread on the ground for a while. So we dropped below our target of 85% distribution. And equally, around our cleaning of the sanitation system, we had to divert our field crew to drive trucks to haul from Boring and to haul to the landfill. So we actually got less done with our pipe inspection and cleaning than we would like to do. And so you actually see that's become a common occurrence where there's sort of our reserve pool for responding to situations. So our budget request actually includes an additional FTE in this program because we're seeing it sort of getting poached from to make sure we don't violate our permit, and we don't want to lose out on our maintenance activities. That's a strategy that only works in the short run. Overall, what's going forward, you are seeing the final steps for implementation of the West Partnership. This budget now will have a harmonized approach for our rates based on service, not geographic location. It's a harmonization of the SDCs based on service, not location. A major undertaking, which we are excited to look forward to, is the board set a goal that by June of 2020 that there will be a countywide surface water management plan. They've asked West to take the lead on that, so we have been working over the last 9 months to facilitate a conversation with many of our stakeholders around what that might look like, what people might be interested in, and we'll be talking about it a lot over the next year. Also, as far as planning for our future, we are implementing the adopted 5-year capital improvement plan. And it's a continual planning process. So we're not saying, well, we won't be back for 5 years. We look at it every year to make sure it stays fresh and it's meeting the needs of the industry and our customers. In particular, we are undertaking a couple different master planning activities. We are looking at what we call the Willamette Facilities Master Plan, led by our engineer, Lynn Chicoine, where we're looking at the Tri-City plant, the Kellogg plant, and the Blue Heron Outfall in West Lynn as one sort of cohesive entity. One of those efficiencies we're able to gain from a regulatory standpoint because they're now under one entity of WES. And we're looking at what's basically a kind of water quality trading by having one permit that covers all 3 discharge points. And then, of course, the long-term challenge that we will be talking about over and over again for many years to come, which is infiltration and inflow. We are seeing leaky systems. We've done a review, and I think we've shared that report with both the advisory committee and the board, where we identified 19 pipe sheds where we're seeing high degrees of I&I coming in, and those are distributed across the system. It affects every city, unincorporated areas, old, new. It's a challenge, and we'll have to work together to make it happen. I think.
Excuse me?
Yes.
On your emerging issues list, there's no mention, perhaps because it doesn't directly make a major impact on the budget, but governance?
Governance, well, in many ways, that's above our pay grade. So I would look to the folks sitting up there at the table to have that conversation. From a staff perspective, certainly we are supporting the conversation, and we have thoughts about the efficiencies that could be gained by maintaining a regional approach, a watershed-based approach. But that's the governance conversation is overall to be led by our stakeholders and elected officials.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions here? There's another page here. Are we stopping for the public hearing now?
I think that we have other materials available. If folks had additional questions, we can drill down, but.
I have another question here.
Actually, comments.
Okay.
Because not everybody gets to read all this material in the public, I'd just like to share a couple of things. I wanted to congratulate you on your Carly Creek project. That was exceptionally well done, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops over time. I'm looking on page 41, and your implementation of your new billing and payment software systems that saved a significant amount of money, and then your collection system master plan that came in significantly under budget, as noted here. And finally, on page 56, your strategic energy management plan that saved over $250,000 in the past 3 years. I just bring these up for the public to hear that. They don't know what you do to save money where you can. Those are just some very good examples of both environmental stewardship and effective financial management. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Nice to know if somebody else is reading this stuff too. Any other comments from here? I would like to open the public hearing then. If we have any members of the public who have questions or comments they'd like to make, please come up, identify yourself. Name, city of residence.
Hello, members of the Budget Committee and the Commissioners. I'm Eric Hofeld from the unincorporated area of Clackamas County. I'm also a member of the West Regional Advisory Committee and was in attendance during the last discussion of the budget. I had several questions, and I don't know whether those have been addressed in the discussions or not. But what I did was develop a spreadsheet, a 3-page spreadsheet that shows, shows the 18-19 budget and also the estimated ending expenditures there, and compared that to the budget going forward. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that the budget was underspent by $2.2 million in FY 18-19, and yet we're still estimating an increase of $4.7 million going forward in 19-20. So my question has to do with whether or not that's necessary. In other words, all my questions are going to be directed at the impact on rates and so forth, so take that under consideration. Next question I have is that the amount and percent of the 18-19 budget estimate, the operating contingency was suggested and budgeted for at $16.3 million in 18-19, and it's budgeted at $15.9 million going forward into 19-20. So again, my question is, do we need that much of a budgeted contingency? Because as I understand it, it represents two months, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, it represents 2 months of operating expenditures plus 25% of the capital's outlay and the SDCs, or minus, is it minus the SDCs or what, including?
Not having your numbers right there. Not having your numbers right there, I think it includes, it sounds big enough, so.
Okay. And so, then if you go to the capital outlay area,
Does Mr. Wong have a copy of
and I understand there were some challenges with the engineers, but capital outlay last year was budgeted at 45.6 million dollars, and only 23 million of it was spent, which means there's 22.2 million dollars worth of capital outlay budgeted that was underspent. That's about 48.3%. And yet going forward, we're still budgeting 43.5 million going forward. And my question was, and the question and the testimony that came out at the Regional Advisory Committee was that Wes was having challenges increasing the number of engineers to run the projects. So my question is, going forward, if we're going to still have issues going forward in the current year or the 1920 budget year with getting enough engineers to run the projects or spend the money, then do we still need that much, or are we over budgeting? Because you got to keep in mind that the last year's budget of 45.8 million was also built into the rates. And so if you're going to have a significant underspending, even though I understand it goes into the carryover, the retained earnings, if you will, then my question is, do we need 43.5 million there in this year's capital outlay, or should it be something more reasonable or smaller, given the fact that we're not going to be able to accomplish those projects? And then if we go into, let's see, I guess that's another question. What's the impact on rates? The other question with regard to the SDCs and the discussion, with the normalization of the SDCs, my question is, because it represents a significant increase in the rate zone 1, what impact does that increase have on the budget going into 1920? I haven't seen a calculation that says, okay, if we adopt the $7,800 per SDC, given the growth that we expect in rate zone 1, what impact will that have on the total SDC revenue? And what impact will that have on the rates? And then I'd like to talk about the ending reserves and fund balances. I don't know why I feel so nervous. I mean, I know all you guys.
You're on TV, Eric.
Yeah. Okay, then going forward in the fund balances, the operating fund was budgeted at $1.5 million in 1819, and it estimated at $9.6 million at the end of the year. And yet going forward in the 2019-20 budget, we're still only budgeting $1.2 million as an ending fund balance.
Okay.
Thank you, appreciate that. So my question is, why are we budgeting so little in the ending fund balance, assuming the fact that we're starting the year with $9.5 million and 9.6 million? And I know Doug will have a perfectly good explanation for that, but
Right.
I just wanted to raise the questions. So, and that's in the sanitary sewer part. And then in the construction fund, of course, we understand what's going on there. We're budgeting only an ending fund balance of $27.8 million for 1920, but yet we're starting the year with about $46.5 million in the beginning fund balance. So that's about the only questions I have. It's probably more than
Keep us
enough.
busy for a while.
And I doubt that you'll be able to get answers to those questions at this meeting, but I think it's worthwhile to look at those facts going forward, because you are anticipating a 5% increase in rates, plus a significant increase in the SDCs in rate zone 1. And so, as a ratepayer, looking out for the ratepayers, I have those questions. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. And it should be noted that this document, unfortunately, had not been presented to Doug, Mr. Waugh, before now. Did you get a copy to him?
The copy was provided not only to Wes, but it was provided to the West Regional Advisory Committee and was a source of discussion at the last meeting.
Yes, I brought it, but unfortunately, Mr. Waugh had
We
missed
don't
that
have
meeting and had not seen this. And
I believe he has a copy in front of him.
I just brought it to him. So rather than hit him cold with this, and I expect that it hasn't been audited, but with your background as a CPA, I have a high confidence level in these numbers.
It was reviewed by the Wes budget people, and it was found to be true and accurate.
Good, thank you. So there's no way to avoid putting you on the spot, Doug.
Well, how about I'll start, and then as I start to falter, he can jump in to do things.
We'll watch.
Yes, yes.
Hey, Chris, is it okay if I speak first, so you don't have to? I know you. I just want to, I think it's worth mentioning that Eric did ask that question at the last meeting that we had. And I thought Lynn, at least with regards to the capital budget, Lynn gave us an explanation at a very, I'll talk to it at a very high level. And it all makes a lot of sense, I think, with the economic uncertainties. From a capital projects perspective, it's hard really to, you've got this goal of what you're trying to construct, and then there's these inevitable delays that either stall a project or postpone it for unforeseen reasons. And so I think that's why there was an underspending for the past fiscal year, and that's why a lot of that money is being moved to the to this future fiscal year. And I think the goal is really that those projects will pick up, or the work that was originally planned for last year will then be moved to next fiscal year. So I think it's not that work's not occurring, it's just a delay of about a year.
Yeah.
And I think that's just inherent to our economy, especially with construction is so expensive right now.
Well, and the hiring of those positions is another thing that it's been delayed because.
Yes, yeah. So I think that there's a lot of different factors
You're
that are
expecting to
feeding
get
into
paid.
to that. Yes, at a very high level. So, and they did speak to that at the last meeting, and it made me feel better about the numbers. So,
I say yes.
Whoops, just stand by, Mr. Savas. Commissioner Savas.
Yes. And I'll maybe help out the conversation a little bit, because I came in on the latter part of it, but I did hear something that I just want to clarify or verify, and that is that we don't really budget, per se, with deliberateness, the ending fund balance. The ending fund balance is a result or a consequence of the timing. If you have capital in there, of when that is spent and how that is spent. What we budget are all the particulars, and then the ending fund balance is a result of all those calculations, and then when it's spent, whether or not it falls within the fiscal year. So.
Right, rates are based on a revenue requirement, money we need to spend. Contingencies and ending fund balances are funds that we have available, but we're not looking to spend them. Given that a budget isn't completely, can't foresee the future completely, you have some monies you just set aside of your existing reserves in contingencies for that purpose. If we need those funds, we come back to the board and ask for an amendment to our budget. So that's a very public process to access those funds. So they're not available to us unless we ask for them. And ending fund balances are the same kind of idea. They're not, you're right, Commissioner Savas, they're not actually in the budget. They're just funds that we have no use for in the current fiscal year that we're budgeting for. They're just there. And they're used to sort of keep things, within the context of how much cash that we have available for the district. So whatever, in the operating fund, whenever we have excess reserves or excess amounts that come through the process, if you will, we have all of our revenues, we spend money on operating expenses. The extra money that we don't need in the operating fund, we transfer to the capital construction fund. As Chris referenced earlier, we're not a profit-seeking organization, so either we spend the money on operations or we spend it on capital. Those are the only two things we spend any money on. Well, except for debt service as well, but anyway, so that's the general reason why the operating balances change from year to year.
Yeah.
That was eloquent. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Story, is there anything else you'd like to falter on, or?
He's doing great, faltering on his own. Well, I just wanted to share in part, we did have a robust conversation around, I think, many of these points with the West Advisory Committee, and there was, I think, an effort to try and make clear that The overall thrust of Mr. Hofeld's comments was, is there a way where we could look at not increasing rates as much as we are this time around? Because I'm seeing some degree of, underspending in the budget. We underspent by 2 million, which I would point out, that's about 7% of our budget. From a, since you can never overspend by $1, that's actually not bad. We're guessing towards the future, and if we get 93% right, I'm fairly pleased with our budgeting process. And it's similar with our capital projects. We're estimating how much we can try and get done in a year, and in many ways, the need drives the estimate. We're seeing what is coming down the pike, and we're trying to get as much done as possible, both with internal hiring, but also we've been contracting out projects. Now, we actually have contracted with the Department of Transportation and Development to take over one of our projects, the rehabilitation of the 82nd Street Bridge, because they have engineers who can do that sort of work, and trying to find those synergies of working within the county structure. But overall, our message back as part of the deliberations was, this isn't the time to say no rate increases, because while we are projecting, we have significant ending fund balances, we're projecting that those are going to decrease by over $10 million. But nevertheless, the amount that we're going to build is not changing. Even if we're not able to build it in this particular fiscal year, we're still going to have to build it. And in some ways, it gets more expensive the longer we take to get to it. So what we're trying to do is smooth it out. And you may think you're winning the race as you're the rabbit, but we're going to go ahead and rush all the way towards the finish line before we take our foot off the gas, not in year one of the 5-year capital improvement plan. Now, it may be, as we go through this process, every year we're going to reevaluate and look at where we are. And frankly, we're hopeful that there will be opportunities to not have to maintain what we are projecting to be 5% per year rate increases. We're actually pleased this year to only have a 5% rate increase because, as I'm sure the commissioners in particular have heard, the labor cost went up nearly 7%. So we actually were able to find room to try and tighten our belts so that we're maintaining that profile for our folks. And overall, I would just say we think that this is a good approach from a financial management standpoint to be able to deliver the projects.
I'll offer another quick comment. Sorry to be kind of rambling around here, but we're trying to address some of these issues. Underspent budget, if you look on page 38, under financial management, it's our performance Clackamas discussion for financial management. The very first metric we have there is for basically our annual operating expenditures will vary from budgeted operating expenditures by less than 15%. That's our goal. We're looking at 6% for this year. So as Chris alluded to earlier, we're getting tighter on being able to manage our budget with what we actually spend. And as Chris said, you want to get close, but you don't want to go over. So being, $2 million sounds like a lot, but when you think about the operating budget being $27-ish million big, $2 million, not so bad. And especially that actually meets our metrics. So anyway, we are focusing on that as an issue internally, and we do track that. So Eric's correct in that we are underspending our budget, but pretty much everybody underspends their budget technically every year.
You'd hope, yeah. At least they're not overspending it.
Right, we sure hope so.
One other comment on the SDC increases. That's a good question. We haven't looked at that yet, but to give you a rough answer, most of our SDC revenue comes from the unincorporated area and Happy Valley. Very little comes from the 3 cities in rate zone 1. So significantly increasing that SDC will have an impact, but in total on the West budget, I don't think at this point that it would be a significant increase in revenue there. But we will certainly take a look at it.
Yeah, we can give you a specific number, but from a back of the envelope standpoint, our demographic projections show that area should grow around 200 EDUs per year, which means the increase in the rates, if you're looking at the delta, it was a little more than $3,000, which means that it would be around $600,000 in additional SDC revenue in the coming year.
And when you're talking about $3,000 for what's our average home price now?
Right.
Pretty small percentage.
Right. So as far as projections in our revenue, it's not going to move the needle a huge amount.
So we have a couple of questions. Commissioner Herbertson.
Just in reference to Mr. Hofeld's concern about the excess funds, for lack of a better term, is that the kind of money you might access to deal with the problem in boring, as an example?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and certainly when we talked about the contingency is a big number. But we have an internal policy. So 2 months operating funds, and then we try to do 25% of our anticipated capital expenditures, which makes our contingency quite large because we have a very large anticipated capital expenditure. So if something goes sideways, of the contingency, north of $10 million of that is the reserve against capital, unusual capital expenditures.
Thank you.
Mayor Axelrod.
Yeah, just briefly, I want to thank Mr. Hofeld for his due diligence and his comments. And we did discuss these some at the committee meeting. And really much of it, I think, is just sort of a nature of the beast of trying to do your best projection of what you're going to do, and then, you know, what you're able to do or not to do. You know, we're seeing the consequences of not being able to do everything we wanted to do. But I was going to raise the contingency, so you've raised that because we do have a very high contingency, which is a significant portion of that. I think we want to maintain that. And, you know, I think Mr. Hofeld's correct in keeping our eye on the rate concern and looking everywhere to keep things down and under control. But I can't see us cutting our legs later for work that still needs to get done. So we still need to have those reserves to do the projects and the work that we've anticipated would not been able to do. If we start cutting that out, we're kind of undermining ourselves. So
Just to be clear about contingencies, and if we don't use them this year, those funds simply are available next year. I mean, the money we only spend money on three things: debt service, operations, and capital. That the money stays within the service, and it ultimately gets spent on one of those three areas. So,
Yeah.
does that not count as part of our emergency fund too? It's in essence, I mean,
Yes.
if we have some kind of real emergency, we need to take care of something, these contingencies can be used.
absolutely, that's
And-
that's
Like hauling
their
effluent from
primary
one plant
reason.
to another?
Yes, yes. And I'll also note, to try to offer you some degree of comfort, we're not actually building the need of the contingency right now into our rate
No.
increase. Because we have adequate ending fund balance to fund that contingency, our rate profile does not build an increase to fund the contingency.
Yeah.
We're using that out of existing reserves. So we're not increasing the rates more because the contingency is higher or lower.
Again, we're a revenue requirement-based operation, which is to say, what do we need to spend? That's how we drive rates.
Commissioner Seves.
Well, as I shared last week, when some of our departments were showing not really a contingency per se, because we have in our policies in the county a 5% contingency and 10% financial reserves, and those are set-asides that are done independently. But some of this carryover or, revenue at the top of the line or the top of the page that is carried over from year beginning or ending fund balance or beginning balance, however you want to look at it. If that number stacks up and it becomes a second contingency, the more that's sitting there or more that's not being spent in reserve, those dollars are losing value every day, especially if they're designed for capital, because the cost of construction is going up and up and up. So you have to have, I think, a modest, responsible amount of contingency for, a month or two or three of operating expenses in case of an emergency. The same token is don't bank it so high that you're actually losing money. And I think, if the economy turns around and it goes negative, okay, and the
that's
price
when you wanna
drops,
spend it.
then there's an opportunity. But that's not something you really want to hope for because there's other things that happen with the economy as well. But in that light, I think it's important to be responsible and not start banking money, knowing that every day that goes by, you're getting less for that dollar being spent in the future. So.
Yes.
Something I think I talked about specifically with our road department, the cost of building roads is not going down, it's going up. And we're sitting on some money that we just don't have the capacity to spend right now, and it's losing value in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely true. And certainly you will recall from our budget proposal, we're burning that down. We're anticipating between $12 and $15 million of our ending fund balance will be expended. That's the expenditures over revenues this year. We're looking to flip the script and start exhausting those resources. Yeah.
So I think that we've had a fairly robust discussion about that. And again, thank you, Eric, for those perspectives. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Any additional questions? And I'd like to close the public hearing. Don't make me use the gavel. And I'll ask the committee if they have any further questions or comments regarding the budget. Then I would like to call, oops.
If I might, and I'm not sure if we're going to do anything about it. I had raised at the committee meeting the concern I had in our environment, in our surface water program, the fact that it was really kind of weakly described or characterized in terms of what our objectives were, what we were trying to meet, and what we're trying to do. And it's my understanding that this is, I think you said a draft revised program we're expecting from about a year from now. So I didn't go back to the narrative to describe, does it describe that in the narrative, or is that picked up in there? So it's,
Yeah,
are we reasonably square on that, so we kind of have an understanding for the record that this is an area that needs work and we're working on it?
Yes.
Just want to make sure we're comfortable in that, with that.
Yes, there's two master planning, you might say, high-level policy discussions going on, both related to the watershed management. The first is the aforementioned countywide surface water management plan. The second is that Ron Wieringa is leading a planning and strategic review of the entire watershed process. We had a watershed master plan that was about 10 years ago, and there's a refresh process going through. We're looking at all of our streams, the functionality of our infrastructure from a surface water management side of the house, and looking at optimization and doing some real capital planning around that, drilling down to a tactical level. Both of those should be ready to go by the next time we're meeting.
Okay.
So now I'd like to entertain a motion, if there's a motion to be made to approve the budget.
I move that the committee approve the 2019-20 budget for Water Environment Services as presented in the total amount of $193,488,822 as found in page 68 of the proposed budget.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? After the vote is counted, that's close enough. Ayes have it, the motion's approved. Any other business?
Do we need to check if there are any abstentions? I don't know if everyone spoke. Maybe they did.
Were there any
Abstentions.
I'll get there. Abstentions? I'll still declare it as passed and adjourn the meeting.